Good evening, everybody. Hello and welcome to the Penobscot Marine Museum Salted Tales Zoom edition. My name is Dan Bookham, and I have the distinct honor and privilege of serving on the Penobscot Marine Museum's Board of Trustees, and I'm going to be your host this evening. So wish me luck as we get these eloquent and loquacious folks set up and ready to talk to you. On behalf of all of us at the museum, I would love to give a huge thanks to our members and those of you who make support of our programming possible at the museum. You can find out more information about programs, memberships, and crucially about donating to the museum on our website, penobscotmarinemuseum.org, and on our Facebook page. I also would be remiss if I didn't note this evening that this program has been made possible in part by the National Endowment for the Humanities, exploring the human endeavor, which we shall do so this evening. And another reminder, please mute your audio and turn off your video. This program is being recorded and will be available on Facebook and on YouTube shortly after we conclude tonight's proceedings. So our first presenter, we're very pleased to introduce Wally Good, and Wally has a familial tie to the museum. His daughter, Cipely Good, is our curator, our chief curator. So we're very glad to have Wally join us. Wally is a retired anesthesiologist and an avid sailor. And he planned a village taking the Sandpiper, a 35-foot Coronado sloop built in '73, for its 500-hour diesel engine maintenance to Travis Otis, the shipwright based in Searsport. The trip concluded with crossing the Gulf of Maine during a full moon and arriving in Searsport for Wally's 70th birthday celebration. Wally's been sailing since the age of 12, racing with his father on interlakes and thistles, and continued sailing through his education, through his military service, and moved to Vermont in '86. Brought the Sandpiper the next year and has brought it back to Maine. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Wally Good.
Hello. So I'm happy to tell the adventures of the Sandpiper. This is 24 days and 8 minutes. This is Sandpiper at her mooring in St. Albans Bay. And the goal was to get her all the way to Searsport by going down the full length of the Lake Champlain, down the Champlain Canal to Troy, down from Troy, the Hudson to New York City and the Bay, round up the East River, out across the Long Island Sound, up Buzzards Bay, through the canal, across Massachusetts and Cape Cod Bays, and then the Great Gulf of Maine, and eventually end up in Penobscot Bay for a lovely sail around before we came in for my birthday party. I'm a survivor. This just got completed on Sunday, the 6th of September. And so it's just a very recent experience. And in our next slide, we'll show you where this is my wife that's with me, Natalie. And this is one of her quilts that she made for the Sandpiper. And it's called Storm at Sea. And these are all different scenes and poems and prayers about being out there in the wild ocean. The Sandpiper was in Otis's Enterprise 2014 when it was completed its full new diesel engine and other refits, and was pulled out by the boatyard from Belmont. And we put her in the ocean and sailed it all the way back here to Vermont by way of the reverse route. So that was the goal, was to take it back. Here is our plan of float plan. And as you know about any float plan, if you've ever been on any sort of a adventure at sea, they say, depending on the tides and the weather and what the captain wants to do, maybe these are the ports we'll go to. So that's where we started, and the guesstimate of how far it would go between each port. The next slide is a visual. So this is on the back of the crew shirt, and was a complete float plan by spots. We didn't go to all those spots, but we went to most of them. So the crew decided to bypass some and to choose other ones instead. So it was a great crew and intrepid crew action. We prayed this prayer often because we hoped to make it. And the crew assembled, was ready to go. So this is the full crew. Not everyone was on the boat at the same time, but everyone participated either by support or by being on the boat and helping move it along. My mother sits in the front, and she has actually sailed the Sandpiper. And my wife was her attendant while we went out on the Great Briny. So it was a boy action at the beginning. And this is a picture of the Four Brothers Islands, just between Burlington, Vermont, and the New York shore. And that was the first major set of islands we had to navigate around in order to be able to get down the lake. We had a beautiful day of sail, and we ended with this sunset, and the you can see the birds are all out there on the wharf. This is Westport, New York. The next morning, we took the mast down, and then we went to the Whitehall, New York, which is the place where the US Navy was founded during the Revolutionary War, that actions that stopped the British invasion down towards Ticonderoga. And this is where the canal that begins. And you see we have quite a lift. And we went as fast as we could. And by the end of the day, we had gotten to Lock 4. And then they closed the canal because the fellas have to go home and have a nap in between. So at 5 o'clock, the canal closes. And each canal lock has a beautiful park around it. So we actually had a lovely breakfast and a lovely dinner here. And then we got into the canal, and the next place we ended up was at this little place, and we're looking in at Newburgh. Then the next place we ended up is NYC. So we're coming into the area. Oh no, this is West Point. So we passed down around West Point. 2 of us were biking, and 2 of us were riding on the sailboat. And this was the shot taken from the sailboat as they went by West Point. Here we can see the Sandpiper taking a picture of from the bikers. So we're up on the bluff, and the Sandpiper's coming through. She's been around through West Point and under the Bear Mountain Bridge. And then next place we end up going is right down to yeah.
That bridge.
That bridge, yeah.
George Washington?
No.
Tappan Zee.
Tappan Zee, there we go. This is looking across to sunrise, and I believe at this point we're just above the Tappan Zee Bridge in Haverstraw. Now there's the GW Bridge, and then you can see all of New York ahead. It was interesting that this distance, it looks very clear, the city. As we got closer, it was complete smog, and you couldn't get a picture like that. Then we came around the end of Battery, and this is the Arabella, which is a sailboat that we have sailed on in the past down in the Caribbean and also out to the islands and in Maine. It's now part of the New York Yacht Club's system. And you may recognize, this is the Statue of Liberty, and this is our main biker. This is John Chisaric with his bike, and he just really need to get one with the statue behind him. So there it is. And you see the jib is rolled up, but now it's rolled out because we had to sail New York Harbor to say we did it. And we had to sail fast because the ferries come in and out with the view that you're looking up through the Manhattan Bridge and the Brooklyn Bridge and the other bridges on the East River. So that's East River View, Battery Park. And then we zip around the corner and we're headed all the way out. We've gone to New Rochelle, and now we're coming into Shipping Point. And around the corner from Shipping Point is Westcott Cove. And that's where we anchored that night. So now pretty far across the Long Island Sound. And here's my crew being hardy and enjoying themselves under sail across the Long Island Sound. These Sandpipers were outside of Old Chatham on the South Shore. We would be looking down towards Martha's Vineyard from here and Nantucket. Then our crew had to switch crews, and these fellows went home. This is my brother Tom. He's my baby brother, and then John, and he went home, and my daughter brought them the car so that she could join us for the rest of the trip. So we switched crew at this point. And here they are, the new crew. Sipperly's on board with Bob, and you'll find that mostly Bob and Sipperly are eating. Almost every picture of them, you'll see the eating. You'll see the Storm at Sea is hanging there as the banner. This is Provincetown, and the last one was East Dennis, by the way. So this is Provincetown, and you come around Provincetown, and we're headed out sailing. We're having a wonderful time, and then we hit the tide rip. And so this is where the Atlantic Ocean crashes with the Cape Cod Sound and with the Massachusetts Bay. So all three bays are right here at this one point. And it's a quite interesting collection of water moving in all kinds of directions that we sailed right across. And from here we headed and ended up going into the only safe port we could find on Cape Ann. This is Rockport, Massachusetts, and they had only less than five COVID cases in the last 2 weeks. They actually had 2 active cases. It was really the safest place we could go on that Cape. And we're following in, and here we are docked on one of their little wharfs, and they have an iconic building that's across the way, and we were given the opportunity to do the storm Laura the next day, which will be the next picture, sitting under that iconic building there. They call that motif #1 building. They say it's one of the most photographed and managed art buildings in the country. And then Bob and you see PPM back there, so we were always carrying the flag for you. And Sipperly's is at the helm, and Bob's ready to go. And we're coming out. We stormed across the Gulf of Maine, and this is the next morning after we woke up in Seguin Harbor at the northeast corner. And we crossed the bay, the Gulf, 24 knot winds, 4-foot seas. So that would mean it's 8 feet from the trough to the crest. And we survived it. They weren't sure, but here we are. And you see we're flying our flags all the time. Cute little island. We loved it. This is where we went or came from. So this is looking across the Gulf of Maine south from Seguin Island. And then this is every place you can get to from Seguin, and that's my brother Bob up there talking to his wife, and the lighthouse. And again, they have to have a little lobster on the way, and so this is now in Rockland. And here we are again. Oh no, we're in, okay, where are we? Oh, Booth Bay, Booth Bay Harbor. That's where we are. So we ended up there. And then we had a lovely meal there. But now we are in Rockland, and this is where we stopped for dinner that night, coming into Penobscot Bay. And here she is already at the dock, sunset, Rockland Harbor. Sunrise. And then we went all the way over to Stonington the next day and ended up getting a grab of a lunch or dinner, and they threw us off the docks because we were using the lobsterman's dock. And so then we sailed over. This is called Hell's Half Acre little islet. So we anchored there, and you could see the mist was in the morning. We had to wait for it to lift before we could really go anywhere. Lovely spot. We enjoyed it very much. Very calm. And the rest of the trip was really quite calm. Here we are coming up Blue Hill Bay, and that's the lighthouse going into Blue Hill Bay right there. Sipperly at the helm again. And then here we are in Blue Hill Harbor, and ready to anchor. This is going under the famous bridge going over to Deer Isle, and with all our flags flying again, and the baggy wrinkles, in case you're wondering what those things are, those are baggy wrinkles. They protect the sails from the shrouds, or the shrouds from the sails, whichever. And here we are sailing on our last day. This is us coming out of we went to Bucks Harbor that night after the bridge, and then we're sailing along Islesboro, and we're just about have Searsport in our sights. And here we are landing in Searsport Harbor, mooring number 1, and made the whole adventure. We didn't lose anybody, and then the party starts. So here's the birthday party and the cutting of the cakes and the pies and all the excitement that was going on as the whole crew celebrated with champagne the fact that we had survived this adventure.
Wally, thank you.
Have it.
Absolutely
24,
wonderful trip.
24 days later.
24 days and 70 years. Thanks for sharing that with us. And that looked like quite the feast at the end. We appreciate that. Hoping you'd save some pie for us, but it's a little hard to eat over Zoom. So, yeah. Well, thank you. Moving on to
by the way.
Moving on to our second presenter tonight, it's Ralph Stanley, a fellow trustee of the museum and all-around legend. Mount Desert Island boat builder Ralph Stanley is recognized by the state of Maine and nationally as a master boat builder. He started his career in 1946 building wooden boats, and during this time he has built and restored more than 70 vessels, including lobster boats, yachts, dories, rowboats, and the iconic Friendship sloop. Stanley became a National Endowment of the Arts National Heritage Fellow in 1999 for his contributions to boat building as a traditional art. He can't be with us tonight in person, but we did recently conduct an interview, and we have some clips to show you from that. In the following episodes, Ralph's going to share 3 stories: his time as a yacht cook, his uncle's Coast Guard adventures, and his father's harrowing night adrift. The legend, Ralph Stanley.
Well, when I was 18 years old, I was a cook on the Nilaragua schooner that's for Mr. Gino Dunn, and we'd been sailing for all day long one time, and we came in and anchored somewhere and for the night, and he says, Mr. Dunn says, I'm not very hungry. He says, I think I'll just have a bowl of cornflakes for supper. So turned to the captain. Captain Peterson says, he says, you can have whatever you want. And so I says to Captain Peterson, I says, you know, I've got some potatoes in the icebox, and I can slice them up thin, and I've got bacon fat that I'd saved, and I can fry you some potatoes. Oh boy, that sounds good, he says. So anyway, I got Mr. Dunn set up with his bowl of cornflakes, and Captain had to eat in the cabin with Mr. Dunn, and so I carried this quite a large bowl of fried potatoes for Captain Peterson. Mr. Dunn started to push his cornflakes out of the way and says, oh, what's this? And I said, well, I fried Neil Captain Peterson some potatoes. And he says, this is enough for me. So Captain Peterson, all the plenty. And I had to go heat Mr. Dunn a plate, and come back with a hot plate, and Mr. Dunn picked up the bowl and scooped about more than half of them off onto his plate. And Captain Peterson was wanting to stop him. And but anyway, finally, I had to find something else for Captain Peterson to eat. Yeah, John Stanley was in the Coast Guard. And he went to University of Maine, and he joined the Coast Guard. And his first assignment was the North Atlantic Ice Patrol. At the start of, during World War I, or World War II, he was stationed at Staten Island, New York. And he had charge of the Coast Guard station there. And the first day on the job, a freighter in New York Harbor was loading munitions. And another freighter was at the same dock, fully loaded, about ready to leave. And when the first freighter caught fire, and they had a fire in the bilge, and it was almost fully loaded with explosives. And they took and they couldn't get the fire out. And John was the commander of the Coast Guard base, and it was up to him to do something about it. So he got his crew, and they went up and boarded the freighter, and decided that the thing to do was to get her in the outer harbor and try to let her sink. And they had fireboats there pumping water steadily into her. And they finally got her towed out in the outer harbor and kept pumping water into her, and she finally sank. But if that freighter had blown up, it would have destroyed half of Manhattan and part of New Jersey and Staten Island. And nobody knew about that for a year because the government didn't want people to know that they were loading munitions at that dock. And after a year, it came out of the papers. Oh, when he came home, he had my father's lobster boat to visit people on Cranberry Island. And he landed us at Northeast Harbor, and he had an awful job to land the boat at the dock. And my father says, look, he says, you're a captain of a 250-foot cutter, and you can't even handle this little lobster boat. And Uncle John says, oh, I got somebody to do it for me. Oh, well, yeah, my father in 1934, I think it was. It was in January, I think. And he was on his way in from hauling traps, and the engine stopped. And he couldn't get it to go, the battery was dead. And of course he was adrift, and it had been a day when it looked like it was going to snow any minute, and it didn't. But that night, about the time that he broke down, the wind come northwest and started to blow hard. And the boat had just had a canvas hood on the bow, and that was all the shelter it had. And it was a little 25-foot boat, and he was adrift all night long. Baker Island Light could see his flares. He lit flares with gasoline rags in a bucket. And the life-saving station on Alfred could see his flares, and but the life-saving station had no boat that they could go out in. They went out with a little lighthouse tender, but it would ice up, and they had to turn back. And Duck Island eventually could see his flares, and on toward morning, Mount Desert Rock could see his flares. And his anchor, he had his anchor out, but it wouldn't hold because the boat was drifting off so fast it would take the anchor up off bottom. And but it went over a shoal spot down almost out to Mount Desert Rock, and the anchor fixed up and held him there. And in the meantime, my mother found out that they had no boat at the life-saving station, so she called the captain of the Kickapoo, who was stationed in Rockland, to break ice in the Penobscot River. And he said, the captain of the Kickapoo said it would take him about 4 hours to get up steam, but he would go as soon as he got steam. And it would take him about 4 hours to get to Mount Desert Rock. So anyway, about 8 o'clock in the morning, the Kickapoo showed up, And but just before the Kickapoo got there, a fisherman from Bass Harbor had come across him and took him in tow and towed him into Southwest. So I towed him into Cranberry Island, almost Cranberry Island, where another boat from Cranberry Island took over and took him into Cranberry Island, where they could get him warmed up real quick, and then they got him up Southwest. The life-saving station got overhauled, and I think they put a new crew in there because they weren't supposed to be without a boat. Well, I don't know. I hope you can get something out of it.
Ralph, no worries about getting something out of your stories. They're always a treat. And sorry you couldn't join us tonight, but I hope everyone enjoyed Ralph's tales. Our third speaker this evening is our Penobscot Marine Museum educator, Sarah Cole. While digging through logbooks in the museum archive, she found tons of fascinating stories, including this one. In 1891, Bessie Dickinson set out from Maine with her mom, her sister Grace, and her dad, Captain Wiley Dickinson, on his ship, the Rappahannock. They sailed over to Liverpool in my home country of England, where they took on a cargo of soft charcoal for San Francisco. And after rounding Cape Horn, smoke started coming out of the hatch from below. We have the original ship's logbook, and Sarah will read us through the last passage written by the first mate, James McCarran.
Hi, thank you. I myself have never been in a difficult situation on a boat, thank goodness, unless you count feeling seasick. So I will be reading this passage from the final entry of the logbook of the Rappahannock from 1891. We have this ship's log in our collections, so I can read you the exact words right from the first mate's pen. Captain reports strong smell of gas coming into the bathroom. Latter part wind, get around to east. Very light crew employed scraping mizzenmast and working on mainsail. Vaporous gas coming from mizzen hatchway and strong odor in the cabin. Great fear of ship being on fire. At noon, Island Juan Fernandez bore north-northeast about 20 miles, ship heading right for the island. Latitude 34 degrees, 3 minutes, longitude 49 degrees, 25 minutes. Light pumps carefully attended. Tuesday, the 10th day of November, 1891. Begins with very light easterly winds and clear sky. Crew at work, scraping mizzenmast and other general cleaning. 2 men on the mainsail repairing it. Smoke and gas escaping from fore and after hatch. At 8 p.m., the worst fear were developed. Smoke visible in both ends of the ship. Knew that our cargo was on fire. All the hatches was battened down and all haste made to reach Cumberland Bay. Wind ahead, tacked as required. The night passing very slow. Wind baffling at daylight. Had 1 anchor in the shoe, the gas so strong forward that we could not live in it. The carpenter and 1 seaman were prostrated. Abandoned the idea of getting the starboard anchor ready. No man could stand the vapor. Got 2 boats off from the forward house, 1 to the main deck and 1 to the poop deck. At 7 a.m., boat from shore came alongside. Asked if they could take us into anchorage. Told him our condition. Said we could get into anchor, but they had no provisions on the island to provide us with. We were getting out of the half deck all we could as fast as we could from the time we got the boats in position where we could put them out. Some of the men getting up tackles, some hoisting stores, some filling bread from the tanks, and doing all we could to reach anchorage and expecting momentarily disastrous fire to break out. Came to anchor about noon, close to the shore in 12 fathoms water. Great excitement prevailing. Some hands getting boats out, some furling sails, and boats crew from shore with some of our men getting lines fast on the beach to haul ship into shoal water. At dark or 8 p.m., had our wire hawser fast to shore, wired to chain, and hauled the ship in to 4.5 fathoms water. Let the men go get some food. Half an hour later, the whole crew were passing provisions and getting such things as we could into the boats. Sent 2 of them to anchor, kept the shore boat and one of our own alongside. At midnight, had an explosion midships in pump well room, blowing off the hatch. Sent the crew away from the ship, except a few. The second mate and captain was below for such things as they could get when another explosion occurred, filling the cabin with gas and smoke. Those in the boats called to them, said the side of the ship was broken out and to hurry for their lives to the boats. Everyone left the ship, not safe to remain longer on board. Got the carpenter from shore and cut a hole into the ship side to scuttle the ship. But another explosion took place, which blowed the top gallant and forecastle and main deck halfway to the foretop. Could see all under the forward house, sending the deck, plank, hatch, forward house, and longboat into the air and to pieces. This was about 4:30 a.m. I was on the beach, landing the stores and looking after them, which work began at midnight. A great fire was the result of the last explosion, being the 4th since midnight. At sunrise, both ends of the ship was in flames. By 10 a.m., the mast had fallen and the ship burning as fast as she could. Only a light southerly wind at the time and smooth sea. At the end of the day, only a charred and burning mass of the ship Rappahannock remained, in witness whereof we set our hands this 18th day of November, 1891. James McCarran, first mate, Peter Bedson, second mate, Charles Dunbar, carpenter, H.C. Hodlett, ordinary seaman. So, to just give you a very short epilogue, all of the crew, Bessie and her family, with her father, the captain, got off the ship and onto the island safely. They lived on the island for 2 weeks, and this watercolor painting that you're seeing now has a handwritten inscription on the back by Bessie. So it's quite possible that she painted it herself either at the time that they were on the island or from memory. Fortunately, a passing steamer came by and took them all to Valparaiso, and upon leaving the island, a young man that Bessie had met, Manuel Carrera, gave Bessie a Chilean flag to remember them by. And we also have this flag in our collection. Thank you so much.
Sarah, thank you. That was an incredible story and so well delivered. And just a plug for the museum. Just recently, my wife, Jessie, who is a multi-generational Mainer, was visiting with some family friends in Round Pond and was handed a document from an old chest that was been left at a camp that the family used to own. And it was the story of her great-great-great-grandfather, Dan Nickerson of Brewer, who was first mate on a vessel that sank off the Carolinas in 1881. Excuse me. And it's his tale of what it was like to sail to New Orleans on carrying ice and then to get caught in the storm and to sink off the Carolinas. And in true Maine fashion, he identifies everybody in the story, even what they're wearing, and every other vessel that came to their aid, but does not name the ship he was on himself. But thanks to the good folks at the museum, we're researching that vessel. They have records of Maine-owned vessels, sinkings going back over the years, ships that left from Brewer, even the ownership logs. So we're pretty confident that with the help of the museum, we're going to be able to finish that puzzle and complete that story. And I recommend all of you, if you're interested in maritime history or have a family tale yourself, to reach out to the team at the museum, and they're more than happy to help and assist in helping enrich and tell the stories of Maine families and folks from away as well. Speaking of adventures and things going wrong, and now a chance to introduce Montville resident Bennett Verbeck. He's got a harrowing tale of adventure on a deserted island in the Caribbean and an extraordinary chance meeting with old friends. So Bennett is a College of the Atlantic grad, graduated in 1989, settled in interior Waldo County, but kept up his sailing. Started as a sailor on Penobscot Bay in the 90s with his current boat Osprey, a Bristol Channel cutter, and he's taken her to the Caribbean twice. He has a US Coast Guard 50-ton master's license, and in the course of crewing professionally on yacht deliveries, has put about 25,000 offshore miles under his gear. So these days, time split between homesteading on Goosepecker Ridge, sailing on the bay, and overhauling Osprey. And when she's back underway, he's got another long journey planned, head north to the waters off Labrador and Newfoundland. Bennett, take it away.
Thank you, Dan. Nothing like out of the fire, I suppose the reverse, out of the fire into the frying pan. But that's what my story is, and it starts with something a captain never wants to hear and something a captain never wants to say, and it's Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. This is the sailing vessel Osprey, half a mile west of South Cat Key in the Bahamas, 25.52 minutes north, 79.2929 minutes west. 2 crew aboard, lost all propulsion, all sail. We are headed towards the rocks. Any vessels, please render assistance. The only other crew aboard, my friend Patrick Terry, who's also from Montville, had been with me. We had just arrived, had sailed from Miami in my little 26-foot boat, had arrived triumphantly after many months of voyaging onto South Cat Key, which is this little deserted rock about 65 miles east of Miami. And I'd only had this boat, this particular boat, for about 2 months. It was the beginning of my new life. I had recently gotten divorced. I had had a farm in Thorndike, had sold that, had read all the books, read all the yarns, was infatuated with the sea and was going to sea and was going to become a sea gypsy, and sold everything, sold my house, sold my car, gave away all of my possessions, had bought Osprey on the West Coast, and was originally going to sail her around, but it got too late and I decided to have her trucked, and I had her trucked to Beaufort, North Carolina, and did some repair on her there, sailed her down from there, down to Florida. Patrick joined me in Florida. And we decided that we were going to continue our voyage east to the Bahamas, and then who knows where else we were gonna wind up. We were stocked with enough provisions and enough rum for several months, and we successfully made it across the Gulf Stream, and my boat is pretty much a sailing boat. So if you know anything about the Gulf Stream, she can move. It's like trying to get across a river in a boat. You've got to point pretty far south because the current can run quite swiftly. But we managed to cross, found this lovely little spot, broke out the rum, anchors were down. I set two just to be sure. Went ashore, had a grand time, and thought, well, this is a life. This is what I wanted to do, was to hit the tropical islands and cruise around. And well, that night, about midnight or 1 a.m, the wind piped up. And we later found out that we were in 70 to 75 knot winds. And it is pretty deafening when the wind starts blowing that hard. I called Patrick on deck. We tried to set sail. That was, we had pulled out both anchors, made a call, put out, and we were headed unceremoniously towards the rock. And we were both, because it was the Bahamas and we just had a half a bottle of rum. So we were both completely naked up on deck trying to get things secure when the boat smashed into South Cat Key, at which point my radio went, my handheld VHF started to die. We both jumped off the boat. I'm trying to call the Coast Guard. They've got a cutter nearby, but the seas are too big and they can't get a rescue boat in. So they say that there's a helicopter on the way, but it's going to be a little while because I had to go back to Miami to refuel. So and the radio's dying, of course. So I realized I have to go back on the boat, one, because Patrick and I are both completely naked, and to get whatever provisions from the boat that I could get, our passports, wallets. And I'm thinking I'm never going to see this boat again. You know, this is it. I've only had her a few months. Here's my life's dream. I get back on the boat, was able to raise the Coast Guard, and I'm watching this boat just being smashed against the rocks and the sides heave in. She's a wooden boat, and thank God she is, because she survived the accident. And I think if she had been a fiberglass boat, she would not have. She would have been holed right there. But because the wood is so forgiving, she ground against that rock all night long, and then the following night. But I got enough provisions. I got us some clothes, got us some shoes, got us off. The U.S. Coast Guard helicopter shows up, lowers down a rescue swimmer and a rescue basket. He loads us in one at a time, hoists us up one at a time in the chopper, asks us, where do we want to go? I'm like, I don't know, Iowa or France or somewhere, something not here. And so off we go, and I'm looking around. This was a few years ago, but I was in my mid-40s, and I'm looking around at these guys. I'm like, does your mom know that you have this helicopter? Because they all look 12 to me. And I was pretty shocked at the age of these, but they were very professional. They were right on top of it, got us up safely. And so we're flying back to Miami in this helicopter, having just wrecked my boat. I'm in shock. I'd seen it in the lights down below as we lifted off. We're writing down our names and our phone numbers and addresses and where we're from. And the rescue swimmer who was there pulls off his head, looks at the pad of paper and goes, Patrick Terry? They had gone to school together at Mount View High School in Thorndike. And the whole ride back to Miami, all I heard was them telling stories about keg parties and who was seeing who, and do you remember this thing? And I thought, well, the sailing life is an awful lot of fun, and is certainly an adventure, and has continued to be an adventure. We eventually did go back, which is a whole other story, as these salty tales tend to be. One leads right into the next, and it's hard to stop. But we did go back. We did get her hauled off, brought her to Bimini, which is a short hop away. Spent 3 days drinking. There's my alarm. And then patched her up and sailed her back to Miami, and then sailed her back to Maine. And I patched her back up over about 5-year period, and I'm sailing her now. She needed a bit more repair, and there was an article in the Waldo Independent at the time about this guy Brad, who was a rescue swimmer, and I don't even get mentioned. Patrick gets mentioned and Brad gets mentioned, but I don't even get mentioned. That's the polite, I suppose. So that's the wreck of the Osprey and the resurrection. You'll have to wait for the next salty tale. So that's it. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Ben. That's quite the story, and proof once again, as we always say, that Maine is really just one big small town.
That's right. It was just uncanny. I was just like, you guys are kidding, right? All the way back, they were talking about Sarah so-and-so and the kegger parties. I was like, okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. Never be rude about anyone in Maine. They're probably someone's cousin. That's what I always say. That's right. Okay. Bennett, good luck with the restoration of Osprey.
Thank you much.
And I'm glad you made it through in one piece, even if you weren't wearing pants. And thinking about your next trip, the trip up to Newfoundland and Labrador, is a great segue into our final presenter of the evening, my old friend, Captain Jim Sharp. Born in Philadelphia in 1933, does not seem possible. Captain Jim Sharp, the thinking woman's Errol Flynn, as I've always described him. He spent a lifetime afloat, from going down to the boat with his dad. He's migrated to chartering in the Bahamas and falling in love with traditional Maine schooners and other traditional rig vessels and antique tugboats. I remember a beautiful vessel called Record that he owned down in Rockland a few years back. Now in questionable retirement, he is the director and founder and leading light of the Sail, Power and Steam Museum down here in Rockland. And most famously, I think, and his best service perhaps amongst many acts of philanthropy and goodness to the state of Maine was back in Connecticut in 1967. He saw the Arctic research and exploration vessel schooner Bowden tied up to a dock, half dismantled and coming apart at the seams. Captain Sharp approached the famed Admiral Donald McMillan, and Admiral McMillan told him, "Take her back to Maine, Jim." Well, Jim brought her back and brought her back to Camden to restore her. And today, thanks to Jim and his eye for a pretty hull and his technical expertise, she is the official vessel of the state of Maine and the flagship vessel of the Maine Maritime Academy, and still a beautiful Arctic-ready schooner. Her story is an interesting one, from exploring the Arctic stuck in the ice to carrying passengers in the windjammer trade. Lots of salty stories to tell, and there's no one better at the salty story than Jim Sharp. So, Captain, take it away, sir.
Well, thank you, Dan. That's quite a story. I have to live up to all that, do I? Well, I want to tell you something else about one of the most famous vessels here in Maine. Shipwreck and disaster. Everybody talks about shipwreck and disaster. As soon as we get my pictures up here, I'll show you what I mean. You know, if you could have a shipwreck every week, you would never suffer for the want of publicity. You'd be on the front page all the time. Gets everybody's attention. I want to tell you about this little vessel navigating some of the most horrific and dangerous, navigationally challenging bodies of water in the whole wide world. And she did it successfully, over and over and over and over again. She never made the headlines in the shipwreck community. She surely made the headlines in the scientific journals and in the sailing community. The little Arctic schooner Bowden, B-O-W-D-O-I-N, named for Bowdoin College. The greatest part of this vessel's nearly 100-year career was spent navigating these incredible waters, and the responsibility was all on one man, this one man named Donald B. McKay, Donald B. McMillan. Donald McMillan, an incredible man. He studied 4 years with the Inuit in the northern part of Greenland. He lived with them. He studied their culture. He became he was practically an Inuit himself. And here he is at the wheel of his little Arctic schooner Bowden, an amazing little vessel that he decided he was going to build. Many years ago, he realized that there was very little known about the Arctic, and he was going to build this vessel and explore the Arctic, and everyone would learn from his endeavors. The little schooner Bowden was the result. She was only 88 feet, wonderful little vessel, made of oak, heavy planking. She had boilerplate around her bow so that she could break the ice, and she could small enough that she could dodge all of these great icebergs up there. She could even go inside them. But glorious vessel, glorious sailing up there. But this is unknown territory. There are no charts. There are no other vessels. No one knows what to meet up there. The only way you learn up there is by running on top of it. If you have a rock ahead of you, you run on top of the rock. My gosh, he did it over and over again. But that's what this vessel was built for. The old schooner right out in the middle of the bay, bang, right on the rock, and the tide fell out, and there they were. Look at the Inuit coming out in their kayaks to see if they could help. Anyway, the tide came, and the old Bowden floated off of there, and she was unhurt, and right away, that's what she was built for. All these different groundings of this poor vessel going through the vicissitudes. Well, as I say, Donald McMillan in the 1920s decided that he was going to take a group north and they were going to study the Arctic. So he got about 12 scientists, so botanists, biologists, various men of great scientific endeavor, and they all crowded aboard the boat and sailed north, up through the Davis Straits, up through Baffin Bay, way up into the North Channel, way up until they were almost in sight of the polar ice cap. And there they found a little tiny hole, a little tiny harbor called Refuge Harbor. They went in right in behind these great big rocks, wonderful protection, and settled themselves down in this beautiful little harbor. Middle of the summer now, there was nice atmosphere, and they snugged down and decided they were going to spend 335 days in that harbor. The night came on, all the long night, all the wintertime, cold, iced in, completely covered with snow and ice. They banked snow up around the hull. They built igloos on deck in order to get in and out of the vessel. They did their scientific work. And then it came time, spring. Oh boy, they're looking forward to getting back to Boston. They had completed their scientific work. And it was a late season. My God, come September, they were so worn out. The old ice was still there, and it was getting fresh ice at that time. What are they going to do? They decided, well, we'll take coal from our stove down and the soot down in the galley there, and we'll put it around the vessel. And it drew the sun, and it melted the ice around the vessel so that she sat in a little pool of water. And they moved ahead over to the beach where the tide, they had 10 feet of tide going up and down there. And where the tide broke the ice, they would be able to navigate. She drew 10 feet of water. They could only go at high tide. On the very top of the tide, they tried to get around that harbor out to the entrance over here. There's a rock. If you can look closely, there's a rock right there. They had to get out around that rock in order to relieve themselves of that harbor. Well, they started out right along the beach. The beach, of course, at low tide was a beach with boulders. At high tide, they would navigate along. Well, they navigated along a little bit ahead, and soon the tide left them high and dry. Over and over again, they did the same thing. When the tide came, they moved a little further towards the entrance. When the tide went, they were hard aground again. Oh my God, it was such an eventful thing to get around to that entrance. They finally were almost at the entrance when all of a sudden a 16 million ton iceberg blew up and completely closed off the exit. What on earth are they going to do now? Well, they got out and perused the situation. They saw that on that iceberg, there was that little neck that was sticking out and caught on that rock out there. And they thought if they could take the boat and smash into that at full throttle, they might be able to break it off and slide out past that iceberg before the wind could blow it in and again shut off that entrance. Well, they backed the vessel all the way up. They tied the governor down. They went to hell and de-larry, but they smashed against that thing. Bowden's bow now was all ironclad, you know. She struck it, broke it off. They slid out just as that iceberg came in and closed up the entrance again. They made it back, sailed back to Boston, and that was just the very beginning of the incredible career of the schooner Bowden. Only the beginning. They turned around hardly enough to just provision and went back to the Arctic again. Back to the Arctic, and 26 times she went back to the Arctic. 26 times this vessel went back into unknown waters, Horatius waters, terrible, terrible conditions of gales of wind and all the rest of the things that plagued these poor old vessels, and still continued on doing her thing in exploration. They wintered in Maine, northern part of Labrador. They wintered in other places and along the shores there in Greenland. Built igloos out on the ice, built igloos on the deck of the vessel so they could get in and out of the vessel and the polar bears couldn't. And on they went, 26 voyages above the Arctic Circle. Admiral Macmillan started to get elderly, 85 years old. He decided with the vessel that has done all of this so historic, they donated to the Mystic Seaport Museum. So he fitted out as if he was going to the Arctic and donated it. All his charts and sails and everything, we were aboard the vessel. Well, Mystic had that vessel there for 10 years and they never lifted a finger for her maintenance. Now she's an old boat by this time, so she's starting to hurt. Well, Macmillan saw this and he said, my God, they're going to ruin that vessel. I gave it to them for posterity. He made it public that if he could get the vessel out, he would find a new place for her. I called him up in 1967 and I said, Captain Mac, I have a place in Maine for her. He said, Jim, take her to Maine, just as Dan Bookham said. Take her to Maine, Jim. So we took her to Maine. And when we arrived in Maine, this is what she looked like. Her rails and bulwark falling off of her, everything, and rotten, the whole foredeck was rotten. I had to tear the whole foredeck off, the brake beam out, and all of that. I put new foredeck on her, new stanchions. We did new waterways and new rails and so on. We started the plank, took the bad plank off of her. We did planking. We covered her over the first time she'd ever had a cover over in the wintertime. She hadn't been hauled out of the water in more than a dozen years, so we put her on against the wall there. We went down and we did her bottom, cleaned her all up. Put her together. They had broken the mainmast when they took that out. I didn't have any money, so I went up to Aroostook County. I got a 185-year-old spruce tree, brought it down, and we made a new mast for her. The old-fashioned way. You take a tree like that, and first you cut it up, square it right up and straight and true, right on the dimension you need. Then you 8-sided, then you 16-sided, then you 32-sided, then you 64-sided, and then you finally plane it round. And we put the masts back in her. We got her fitted out, and we sailed her down to Provincetown to salute Macmillan, who's 96 now. And we crossed the bay. My God, it was dungeon thick of fog. 300 people were waiting for us over at Macmillan Wharf, and we were trying to find Macmillan's house. He lived right on the shores of the bay there, so we didn't have any electronics or anything. All we had was the lead line. We ran out of our time. We started sounding. The bottom's coming up. Finally, the leadsman shouts out, 3 fathom, Cap, that's 18 feet. We were drawing 10.5. I said, well, we have to give it up and go over to the wharf now. And just at that time, my God, it was God-given. There was a hole in the fog, a corridor of clear weather right over to the beach. And there was Macmillan's house. And there was Max standing on his porch ringing his bell. Couldn't believe it. He could hear our horn. He knew we were coming. And there he saw the vessel sailing through that little patch of clear weather. And we went over and tied up. There he is right on his porch right there. We went over and tied up at the wharf, and 200 people came, 200 of the 300 people there came down on the boat, and I thought they were going to sink her. But it was quite an event, a sentimental journey, they called it. So the vessel went through a number of other vicissitudes. She was owned by several different owners as time went on. And finally, a woman bought her and donated her to the Maritime Academy in Castine. So she is now the flagship for the Maine Maritime Academy, and she is a flagship vessel for the state of Maine. Wonderful condition now. She's been rebuilt several times since I had her, and she's got a nice long life ahead of her. She's going back to the Arctic now, taking young mariners, teaching them the ways of the Arctic and the ways of a sailing vessel. I can remember old Mac saying, the little Bowden, she may shake you up, but she'll always bring you home. And there she is through another gale of wind up in the channel and headed home. Glorious vessel now owned by the State of Maine Maritime Academy. And that's the story of the schooner Bowden. Yours, Dan.
Jim, thank you so much. A stirring tale and incredible vessel. And thank you for bringing her back to life and ensuring that young mariners out at Castine have many generations of experiences in the high north on her. And what an incredible tale. We hugely appreciated what you did. In fact, behind me, you can't really make it out, but that chart is the Denmark Channel between Iceland and Greenland. I happened to be up in Greenland on an expedition last year on the East Coast in the town of Tasiilaq, and in their small museum, in amongst the Inuit relics and exhibits, as well as tales of Danish colonialism, there was a small photograph of a white schooner flying the Stars and Stripes, and it really touched me to be that far from home and see a photograph of the Bowden in the small museum in Tasiilaq. And I thought of you, and I thought of the Academy, and I thought of Admiral Macmillan. So thank you for all you did to keep her alive. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Well, thanks to everyone who spoke tonight, to all of our presenters. As you know, Zoom unfortunately doesn't let everyone give you a round of applause that you deserve, but we've enjoyed every minute of the stories tonight. Thank you also to those of you who attended online. Please do check out our upcoming programs. We have weekly Peek into Paintings on Facebook, live with Sarah. There's going to be an October Zoom speaker series presented by the museum staff, and the sometimes spooky, always fun, end of season event last night at the museum. This year it's going to be completely outside, but it will be on campus and still feature stories of adventure and tragedy at sea. There's a link on the website, penobscotmuseum.org, and that's linked to in our comments on this Zoom meeting. You can check it out there. We've really enjoyed bringing you these new programs all year long, and as noted before, most of them still available on Facebook and YouTube as well. Some fantastic, very rich programming and material on the museum website too. Tonight's edition of Salted Tales will also be posted to Facebook and YouTube soon, so please feel free to share that with your friends. And finally, if you know of someone who has had incredible seagoing adventures they might like to share in a future program, please contact the Penobscot Marine Museum Education Director, Jenna Ganskup. Her email is in the chat box. That's all we have for you tonight. Thanks ever so much for joining us. Thank you for your support of the Penobscot Marine Museum, and have a great evening. Take care, everybody.